will begin with Dr. Karen Cumming.
Thank you very much, Shanika. Fellow Guyanese, good morning. Greetings. On my right, indeed, as was mentioned before, is Mr. Elson Lowe. I'm going to start by telling you and bring you up to speed with what's happening in Region 2, Saudi Hospital. There is a crisis at Saudi Hospital leading to high incidence of newborn deaths. The parliamentary opposition is deeply concerned about the alleged gross mismanagement of the Saudi public hospital. Several nurses and doctors at the hospital have reported that there were no obstetricians and gynecologists on duty for the last 2 weeks. And as such, mothers and their babies were at risk of adverse pregnancy outcomes. Both gynecologists were on leave. The neonatologist has since returned. However, the gynecology department remains without a specialist. The chief medical officer had sent a general doctor, a medical practitioner who's not a specialist in, we will call it OBGYN, obstetrics and gynecology, and even surgery, and to do surgeries and to more or less monitor the mothers, at-risk mothers. Our concerns include, in the event of any complications in surgery, what will be the course of action and who will take such responsibility? There are also questions pertaining to whether the new head of department is even qualified to do surgeries. Another issue of major concern lies within the pediatrics department at public hospital in Saudi. The neonatal intensive care unit, which we call NICU, was allegedly deemed unsafe due to multiple neonatal newborn deaths. We in this side of divide and in the opposition have been informed that there were at least 5 deaths in the month of June, which forced management to close the unit. Information pertaining to the deaths can be verified from the hospital records department. At present, the pediatrician is also unavailable to manage the department. For at least 2 weeks, both the neonatal and pediatric departments were covered by a Cuban doctor whom, to our knowledge, has not been licensed for practice. These revelations are very disturbing and, if fully verified, can have serious implications on the health and well-being of patients at the hospital, at the Saudi hospital there. And it begs the question if there will be proper access to proper health care for the public. Our country's health system boasts 5 levels of health care, which range from the health posts, health centers, district hospitals, regional hospitals, and the referral hospital, Georgetown Hospital Cooperation, level 5, we call it. Our system also in health in Guyana is also decentralized, as decision-making is spread throughout the 10 administrative regions, which allows for less bureaucracy, but rather a more efficient and better healthcare system delivery and for better health outcomes. Guyanese in mid-January 2024 were informed of $38 million $38 million for the retrofitting of the neonatal intensive care unit. Of course, it was being commissioned at the Saudi hospital with pomp and splendor, while at the same time, 21.4 million was also set aside for extension of the nurses' hostel at the Saudi public hospital. However, it was not too long ago that a study done by Sarah Singh and others in February 23 that indicated that Guyana could see a reduction in neonatal intensive care mortality owing to the implementation of a level 3 NICU. The authors had warned, however, that the leadership, the staff, and the physicians should remain vigilant while adopting a collaborative approach, individualized to the local circumstances in the regions. Neonatal deaths occur during the first 28 days of life. And so whether they are early neonatal deaths, which take place early, that's during the first 7 days, or late, after the 7 days, but before 28 days, it's a cause for concern. Though there are several predictors of neonatal mortality, such as low birth weight, preterm births, and maybe the length of stay at the NICU. And when we consider the complications of preterm birth, birth asphyxia, neonatal infections are among the common causes of neonatal mortality. The point is that such serious consequences and occurrences will reflect the type of prenatal, intrapartum, and neonatal care being offered at the facility. We therefore call on the Minister of Health to immediately launch an investigation into this matter and to quickly make public the findings along with, corrective measures taken. We prefer that if the trend of neonatal deaths continue, Guyana may fall short of reaching the Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 2030, of having at least 12 deaths per 1,000 live births. We will continue to demand and agitate for a robust and committed workforce, the acquisition of adequate drugs and medical supplies based on patient intake, and good leadership and management for the providers and users of the health facility. I thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Elton.
JAGDEO and PUP incompetence on full display in oil block auction failure. After much fanfare, Guyana's first offshore oil block auction has become such an unmitigated disaster that Barrett JAGDEO is now trying desperately to salvage it. He has recently informed the nation about granting more concessions to the winners of the bids and his government's intention to conduct seismic studies in unawarded blocks. This is the same man who was adamant previously that the oil block auction simply could not wait on seismic studies. Seismic studies would have allowed bidders to access much more detailed information about each block. There was therefore understandable surprise when the government decided to push forward with the auction without the needed studies. Now, like a child who ran to play without doing his homework, JAGDEO has to go right back to conduct the very seismic studies he neglected. This hit or miss approach characterized the entire auction, with questions being raised about the sizing of the blocks, government's capacity to approve oil company operations budgets, fiscal terms, and even the restrictions on financing options that firms were facing. Without comprehensive seismic studies and large enough blocks to allow companies to access to more than one type of oil prospect, as has been the convention with Guyana's oil blocks, these strict terms were bound to turn investors away from the start and lead to endless negotiations with those who are brave enough to stay the course. The result of this is that the cabinet has struggled to finalize agreements with companies to begin work on these blocks. We believe that a thorough review of any oil blocks that may be auctioned in the future must be conducted in concert with seismic studies so that we can properly size our blocks to make them attractive. We also believe that companies who are interested but unable to reach an agreement with the government for various prospects should be engaged to identify acceptable variances to the terms of agreement that would allow work to proceed. Further, rather than the minister having authority to approve operational budgets, we stress once more the importance of a robust petroleum commission, which can operate at a large enough scale and great enough level of expertise to ensure the smooth function of the industry. The PUP and JAGDEO must not be allowed to treat Guyana's remaining oil blocks and any acreage which is relinquished in the future as personal property. This attitude has set any oil production in these blocks back by several years, and as a result may cost the country billions of dollars in deferred revenue at best and investor interest altogether at worst. There may be several billion barrels of oil in the remaining offshore oil acreage, as the USGS has long indicated the robust potential of our offshore territory. To mismanage such a substantial national asset to this extent is totally unacceptable. As the next government, we will compensate teachers for their service retroactively. We are troubled that the national teachers' strike has ended without teachers being compensated retroactively for their services over the last few years. This represents government meanness and mismanagement beyond measure, because teachers must surely be going back to classrooms in a discouraged and weary state. We know that, out of concern for their students, they will work professionally as always. We wish to put on record that, as the next government, we will factor in the multiple years the PUP has refused to engage on for salary increases and provide them adequate compensation after good faith negotiations. We do not expect that the government will provide any substantial increases going forward, as they have clearly demonstrated a confrontational, unyielding, and cold stance when it comes to salary increases for teachers and public servants more broadly. This means that when in office, come 2025 or sooner, it will be our task to make up for the PUP's total disregard for fair compensation. We will pay our teachers what they deserve and look forward to working closely with them to help ensure our schools improve swiftly and comprehensively. PUP corruption continues unabated. People must now banish the PUP from government. The evidence continues to mount that this PUP government is even more corrupt than its previous incarnation from 1992 to 2015, and is most likely the most corrupt Guyana government ever, as measured by dollars. The level of corruption has allegedly reached the highest government offices, with the president, vice president Jagdeo, several ministers, and PSs under intense suspicion by the public. News that Minister of Natural Resources Vikram Bharat was questioned last night, July 11th, at JFK Airport by U.S. federal officers only confirms in the minds of many Guyanese that the PUP government has likely brought untold harm to the country in terms of the monies that have been stolen in general, and in terms of the country's international image and its ability to transact business locally and internationally. The people of Guyana must now call on the government to step down in shame. It is the least patriotic act they can do. Otherwise, the people must use their votes at the next election to register their rejection and disgust with the damage the PUP government has wrought on the country and its people. The PUP must now be banished into the political wilderness. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I will take questions, and please note, today our questions will be taken on our press feed. Mr. Adam Hart.
Good morning, everybody. So Dr. Cummings, one of the problems we always talk about is having trained nurses. It has long been said that the nurses are key to the institution. And I want to believe that had there been very trained nurses, then the absence of the few specialists might not have mattered. What is the composition of trained nurses at SUNY?
Good morning, Adam. Thank you for your question. I don't have the figure on hand, but I can get it for you. But what you know, I mean, I've spoken ad nausea at the Parliament, you know, about 600 nurses Georgetown Hospital alone wanted. I recognize that 146, even the lowest tier patient care assistants, resigned in 2023. So we are in crisis. I mean, we have heard of bringing persons from Bangladesh and Pakistan, and, you know, of course, it's a global village. Well, what we want to know, pay our teachers, pay our nurses, the public servants a good salary, you know, give some respect, you know, so that they can have this motivation. Of course, they love the work, and, you know, Guyanese will make it anywhere in the world because we have that, you know, that extra, how should I say, compassion, you know. Guyanese, we talk about Guyanese nurses. And so it's really unfortunate that at this level, you know, neonatal deaths are still occurring, you know, just like that. 5 deaths in the last month. That's too many. That's too many.
The next question then. Generally, at least in other jurisdictions, you hear of people taking legal action on the suspicion of negligence. Can that be undertaken in Guyana?
I guess we shouldn't say never because it's it's doable. What we need to find out, as I mentioned in my first statement, we need the investigation being done, and let the public be made aware of what's the reason for the deaths. As I alluded to earlier, there are complications. And there are cases where you can have birth asphyxia and preterm labor, but it does goes to show also that our safe motherhood program is, we need to improve on it, because we're talking about persons antenatal, intrapartum care and postpartum care. And so, all hands on deck, the nurses, the specialists and so forth, because we love our people. We're less than 1 million people here. So to have deaths, we need to meet the 1 million mark sometime or the other. And so it just goes to show that nurses are, for some reason, are not around. If someone goes on leave, there isn't a proper schedule to say, well, okay, this person A, nurse A, Dr. B will take over and so forth. It seems to be haddock, and, the government and minister will both be training so many doctors. We keep on training and so forth, and they're leaving, So we have to take a back step, where are we now? What we want to achieve optimal health for our citizens. What are some of the steps need to be taken? We have our stakeholders, PAHO and others. So we have no excuse. And I hope that some good, sooner rather than later, some good sense will prevail.
Thank you. Ms. Devina?
Hi, good day, everyone. Just to follow up on what Mr. Lowe said earlier, and sorry, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard you say that the strict terms in the PSA pushed investors away from this the recent oil blocks auction. I'm not sure if that is what I heard you say, but correct me if I'm wrong. I wanted to know though, what are some of the instances or the provisions you believe were too strict in that in the PSA, and perhaps give your suggestions to what a more appropriate provision would be.
Yes, thank you very much, Davina. Two of the issues that have been raised really are the terms of relinquishment and also these upfront monies that needed to be provided. Those are some of the, I think, the initial comments that we heard from various oil companies and that have been out in the media as being quite restrictive. Of course, if you've got a very fast timeline for relinquishment, it means that oil companies will have to really be very aggressive in their exploration. That, of course, requires them to raise finance quickly, which could be difficult and would, of course, be difficult if you don't have adequate seismic studies to demonstrate what it is that you're actually going to prospect for. And then also to be able to have to put up large sums up front, I think for many of these companies has really been a challenge. So those are some of the strict terms of the auction, I would say, really, that have been a hindrance, I would say. And of course, one of the real questions that has been asked is why we haven't seen in that auction many large oil companies bidding for blocks, and as to whether some of these restrictions put off some of the major companies that might have an interest.
And just to follow up, what would you say would be more appropriate terms for the relinquishment time and the signing bonuses, as you mentioned?
Yes, well, the first thing I would say is, to me, there isn't any need to shorten the times or to make the times any more restrictive for relinquishment. We've already got existing relinquishment provisions that have been useful. What I would say, though, is, of course, that what we need to be doing is to either enforce relinquishment when the time comes, or to be carrying out the appropriate studies and the appropriate assessments to be able to decide whether or not there needs to be any extension. So the government's policy when it comes to relinquishments and so on needs to be closely looked at, but the timelines are not, I think, problematic. So making them more restrictive, I think, was questionable from the start. But what I would say also is that it seems to me that the government is made these adjustments without really consulting with some of the oil companies that are currently operating and with oil companies that might be interested in the Guyana block to get their sense of what it is that they require in terms of a timeline to carry out operations. I think this is also related to the issue of the minister approving operations budgets, because we've of course seen oil companies say that they're very concerned about the minister approving operations budgets and his capacity to do that. Now, if the minister doesn't have capacity to approve operations budgets and you've got tight timelines for relinquishment, then obviously that's going to make it very difficult for companies to operate. And so it seems that the government has been, first of all, not been consulting appropriately, and second of all, has been extremely, I think, overzealous to the point that the auction has fallen flat. I think that if they were looking to be as restrictive as they have been, they needed to be providing companies with seismic, and they needed to be a petroleum commission that could keep up with a lot of these requirements. So I think the entire framework has been poorly thought through.
Thank you. Ms. James, I have two substantive questions that are not related to the press statement. Can I go ahead or should I wait until you open the floor?
I did say that today we will not be taking questions outside of the press statement when we started.
Is it
Unless it
in
is
relation to
related.
oil or something in relation to what we're talking about? Then that would be okay.
It is in relation to oil. I can go ahead and ask my questions and then you can let me know whether you address them here or maybe later. So firstly, the Natural Resource Fund reports were tabled in the National Assembly this week. I wanted to know whether the opposition has any concerns or comments regarding the information that was presented. And secondly, we saw that the country now has its own capital stack that is on standby for any sort of oil spill event. I wanted to know the opposition's thoughts on that as well.
Thank you. So two points to note. The first is that while we are seeing reports come out of the NRF, the real devil is in the details in a sense, because we have a government which has, of course, changed the rules on the NRF so that the vast majority of resources, 98% of resources can be withdrawn. That is alarming, and it means that we're not going to have a substantial NRF for the next several years, at least, unless, of course, they come and change the rules again and make it even more, make it even easier for them to access more funds. That's the first thing. We must, of course, in relation to that, note that the government has only recently appointed the opposition's candidate for the investment committee of the Natural Resources Fund, which is to us an indication that they are fully well aware that they're going to use all the funds that are in the NRF. And if you're going to use all the funds, why have an investment committee in the first place? So we believe that they've been dragging their feet on that appointment, which we provided. We made our submission something like a year ago. So they've really been dragging their feet on that. So I say that to say that the submissions that you're seeing in the National Assembly are really a reflection of not a true reflection of what we're going to see with the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Rather, we're going to see the plundering of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So if you see funds in there, those funds are not going to be in there for long. That is really the concern here. So that's on one end as it concerns the Sovereign Wealth Fund. One of the things I would also like to make note of, which I find is interesting, we saw, I believe, that Guyana got 83 million US of interest from the funds that were in the Sovereign Wealth Fund last year. So the accumulated interest is 83 million US, which is substantial. And of course, as we pointed out, could have been used to pay teachers and public servants and nurses the increases that they were looking for, so as to ensure that our public service functions as effectively as it really needs to. But to me, the reason the government has been hesitant to speak at all about the interest is, again, because they intend to empty that Sovereign Wealth Fund. And if you're going to empty the Sovereign Wealth Fund, then you're not going to want to talk about the interest that is earned if you leave some of the money there to earn that interest. And so that is one of the important things that we should keep an eye on. Additionally, as it concerns the cap and stack, it is always, of course, useful that we have additional safety equipment here in the event of an oil spill. However, There have been instances in the past where safety equipment has not been able to function effectively. Oil spills are notoriously difficult to contain quickly. You would have seen with the Deepwater Horizon spill that there was a failure, in fact, of the equipment that they brought to cap that well, and that failure of equipment led to a prolonging of the oil spill. And so, really, while of course it is useful that we've got additional equipment, it is no substitute for a parent company guarantee and appropriate insurance. So we need to continue to push for that, and we need to bear in mind that these kinds of safety equipment, while useful, do not in any way guarantee that the country is insulated altogether from an oil spill.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Sorry. I have a question for Mr. Lowe. Excuse me, sir. You talked about the block auction being a disaster. I might be out of touch. There were about 6 bids for these blocks, you said, and they were the new regulations. Was it the new regulations that caused this block auction to be a disaster?
Thanks very much, Adam. So really, I think one of the most important issues that has caused this to be so disastrous is the government's refusal to do the appropriate seismic studies so as to be able to identify what prospects there are in these oil blocks. Now, of course, as a company, and we under the Department of Energy had spoken about need to do seismic studies because we need to inform bidders as to what exactly they're bidding for. So the government approached this under some, it seems to me, wild assumption that oil companies would just go for oil blocks, irrespective of whether or not there was enough information for oil companies to be able to identify what it was they're bidding on. And the government said, oh, they don't want to wait on the studies, it'll take too long. And so what we've seen is let's go around in a circle for several years, because the government is now going to do the same studies that they should have done in the first place. So that is one of the critical factors. But that must also be seen in concert with the restrictive terms that the government put forward, and there are a range of them, as we have discussed thus far in this press conference. One that is also really important is the size of the blocks. The government really reduced the size of the blocks. So you have very small blocks. That has meant that not only do companies not have a lot of the initial information they need, the previous convention was that you provide companies with blocks that have different types of geological formations, different types of oil formations, so that if one does not work out, the company has an option of drilling in a different one. Now, without doing the appropriate seismic and without large blocks that would facilitate that, we've got a situation where companies were faced with a very unpalatable choices. And so as a result, we did not see the level of interest that we would hope for. Many blocks were not even bid on. And then on top of that, we've not seen a work scope forward in the vast majority of these blocks. So that to me is indicative of a real mismanagement of the oil block auction. And I don't know where it is that they got their assumptions from, but it seems that their assumptions were all wrong in terms of how they should approach this auction.
And from his comments, you said a Cuban doctor there might not have been qualified to practice. So how was he placed at Sunny Hospital? Who placed him? The medical board has not any say in this.
Your guess is just as good as mine, Adam. Anything is possible with this government. You know that. And, of course, we've had good relationship with Cuba since 1972. I mean, it's over 5 decades of good relationship. But, I mean, we're looking at the principle here. And we're looking at delivering optimal health to our citizens. And I don't know if there's any relationship between the doctor and the RHO, or, I won't vouch for anything. But the fact remains is just, the type of healthcare is that, or just hold on till somebody comes, just hold on until somebody comes. It's more than that. You have to give quality care to the patients. And so that's what we're talking about. So that's why we're worried.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Being that I see no other hands raised, I want to thank our media personnel for joining today's presser, and of course our viewing audience on all our social media platforms. We do hope that you have a wonderful afternoon and weekend.
Yeah.